My heart was racing. I didn't know if I should run or stay. How could I explain what I had just seen, and in a language I was still learning? It had been an exhausting day. I had spent hours in meetings, smiling politely, nodding, and trying to keep up with the fast-paced conversations. My English was decent, but being in a professional setting made me second-guess every word I said. By the time the meetings were over, my head was buzzing. When my coworkers invited me to dinner, I declined. "Thank you, but I need some time." "To rest," I said, offering a tired smile. What I really needed was to be alone, to explore the city at my own pace. London at night felt magical. The streets were alive with glowing lights and the hum of activity. Cars passed by, their headlights reflecting off wet cobblestones, and the chatter of people drifted out from cozy pubs. Wrapping my coat tighter around me, I wandered aimlessly, letting the city guide me. After about 20 minutes, I found myself in a quieter part of town. The wide, busy streets had given way to narrow lanes, lined with old brick buildings. Noise of traffic faded, replaced by the distant sound of footsteps and the occasional laughter from a passing couple. That's when I saw it, a narrow alley tucked between two buildings. The alley was dark, illuminated only by a single flickering light at the far end. Something about it drew my attention. It felt out of place, hidden and quiet, in contrast to the liveliness just a block away. I hesitated. Common sense told me to keep walking, to stay on the well-lit streets. But curiosity is a powerful thing. The alley seemed to call to me, as if it held a secret waiting to be discovered. Taking a deep breath, I stepped in. The air in the alley was cooler, carrying the faint scent of damp stone and something sweet, like flowers. My footsteps echoed softly as I walked, and I noticed how the walls on either side seemed to lean in, making the space feel smaller the further I went. Halfway down the alley, I stopped. There was a shop to my right, its door slightly ajar. A faint light spilled out, casting shadows that flickered against the walls. I couldn't see inside, but the faint outline of shelves suggested it was some kind of antique store or workshop. Just as I was about to turn away, the door creaked open wider. A man stepped out. He was tall and thin, dressed in a dark coat. With the collar pulled up, in his arms, he carried a large object wrapped in cloth. The shape of the object was angular, like a box, but its purpose was unclear. The man moved quickly, glancing over his shoulder as if he was afraid someone might be watching. His steps were hurried and deliberate, and he clutched the object tightly to his chest. Then he looked at me. For a second, our eyes met. His expression was unreadable, neither anger nor fear, but something in between. My chest tightened as I stood frozen, unable to look away. The moment passed quickly. The man turned and disappeared into the shadows at the end of the alley, his figure swallowed by the darkness. I stood there, my mind racing. Who was he? What was he carrying? Why had he looked at me like that? A loud clang broke the silence, making me jump. The sound had come from the direction the man had gone, but when I looked, the alley was empty. My pulse quickened, and a sense of unease crept over me. "Get out of here, Emma," I thought. I turned and walked quickly back toward the street, resisting the urge to run. My footsteps seemed too loud, echoing unnaturally in the confined space. As I neared the alley's entrance, I glanced over my shoulder one last time. The shadows seemed darker now, heavier, as if they were hiding something. When I stepped back onto the main street, the noise and lights of the city were a welcome relief. People walked past me, laughing and chatting, completely unaware of the strange encounter I had just experienced. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease. It was nothing, I told myself. Just a random moment, a coincidence. The man probably worked at the shop and was carrying something valuable home. There was no reason to overthink it. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't forget the way he had looked at me. I continued walking, but the magic of the night had faded. Every shadow seemed darker, every sound sharper. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see the man following me, but the street remained empty. When I finally reached my hotel, I felt a wave of relief. Inside the safety of my room, I leaned against the door and took a deep breath. My hands were shaking, and my chest still felt tight. "What was that?" I whispered to myself. I replayed the events in my mind, trying to make sense of them. The man, the box, the way he had stared at MIT was all so strange. "Stop I told myself firmly. "It's just your imagination." I moved to the bed, ready to change into pajamas and forget the whole thing. But as I reached for my bag, something tugged at my attention. My coat. There was something wrong. I turned toward it, frowning. The fabric looked fine, but there was a weight in one of the pockets. I hadn't put anything there, had I? Hesitantly, I walked over and reached inside. My fingers brushed against paper. Confused, I pulled it out. It was a small white envelope, slightly wrinkled but unmarked. No name, no address, nothing to explain where it had come from or why it was there. My heart began to race again. I tore it open carefully and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. Written in bold, blocky handwriting were the words, "Be there. Midnight." I stared at the paper, my chest tightening. Midnight, that was less than an hour away. Who had put this in my pocket? Was this some kind of joke? I dropped the note on the desk and sat down, pressing my hands against my temples. This didn't make sense. Had it been the man from the alley? But why, and how, had he gotten close enough to slip it into my coat? I grabbed my phone and searched for the address. It wasn't far, just a short walk from the hotel. My rationale side told me to stay put, to lock the door and ignore the whole thing. But curiosity tugged at me. What if it was important? What if someone needed help? The clock on the wall read 11:30 p.m. Before I could change my mind, I grabbed my coat, slipped on my shoes, and stepped into the cool London night. The streets were quieter now, the bustling crowds from earlier replaced by the occasional late-night wanderer. The air was damp and cold, carrying the faint scent of rain. I walked quickly, my footsteps echoing against the empty sidewalks. I glanced at my phone again to check the directions. The address was just a few blocks away. As I got closer, the streets grew narrower, the glow of the streetlights dimmer. Finally, I saw it. A small cafe tucked between two larger buildings. The sign above the door flickered faintly, casting uneven shadows on the sidewalk. The windows were fogged over, making it impossible to see inside. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the door handle. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to forget the note and go back to the safety of my hotel. But I had come this far. I had to know what was waiting inside. I pushed the door open. The cafe was dimly lit, with only a few tables scattered. Across the space, a barista stood behind the counter, wiping down mugs. He glanced at me briefly, before returning to his work. In the far corner, a woman sat alone. She was wearing a dark coat, her hair pulled back into a messy bun. Her fingers tapped nervously against the edge of the table, her eyes darting toward the door every few seconds. When our eyes met, she froze. Then, she motioned for me to come closer. "You're here," she said, her voice low and urgent. I approached cautiously. Excuse me." She leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you have it?" I blinked. "Have what?" Her expression changed instantly. Her face paled, and she leaned back slightly, studying me. "You don't have it," she said softly, almost to herself. "I think there's been a mistake," I said quickly. "I don't know what you're talking about. Someone left this note in my pocket." Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked terrified. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "You need to leave now." I felt a chill run down my spine. Why? What's going on? The woman glanced toward the windows, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. They're watching, she said, her voice trembling. If you don't have what they're looking for, you're in danger. Who's watching? I asked, my voice barely audible. She shook her head. Just go. Get out of here before they see you. I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to leave, but my curiosity rooting me in place. Before I could ask anything else, the woman stood abruptly, pulling her coat tight around her. I'm sorry, she said, brushing past me. I can't help you. She disappeared through the door, leaving me alone in the cafe. I stood there for a moment, frozen. The barista looked up from his work, raising an eyebrow at me but saying nothing. Realizing I was still standing in the middle of the room, I turned and hurried out the door. The street outside felt darker now, the air heavier. I looked in both directions, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. But the street was empty. I pulled my coat tighter around me and started walking quickly back toward the hotel. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Who were they, and what were they looking for? When I reached the hotel, I didn't stop until I was safely inside my room with the door locked behind me. Leaning against the door, I closed my eyes and tried to steady my breathing. The note, now crumpled in my hand, seemed heavier than ever. Whatever I had stumbled into, it was bigger than me, and it wasn't over. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the crumpled note in my hand. My chest still felt tight, my thoughts racing with questions I couldn't answer. Who had put this note in my pocket? What did the woman mean when she said, "They're watching"? I stood abruptly, pacing the room. My instincts told me to stay inside, to lock the door and wait for morning. But every time I thought about the alley, the man and the woman's warning, a sense of urgency gnawed at me. What if someone was outside right now? What if they were waiting for me to do nothing? I glanced at the window, pulling the curtains slightly aside. The street below was mostly empty, except for the occasional car passing by. It looked quiet, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. Then I heard it. I grabbed my phone and clutched it tightly, my hands trembling. If someone was out there, I needed to act. Stay calm, I thought. I couldn't stay in this room forever. I decided to leave. Quickly but quietly, I slipped on my coat and stuffed the note into my pocket. Opening the door a crack, I peeked into the hallway. It was empty. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out and walked briskly toward the elevator. My pulse pounded in my ears as I jabbed the button and waited. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding, and I stepped inside, glancing over my shoulder one last time. Still nothing. The ride to the lobby felt endless. When the doors finally slid open, the bright lights of the reception area calmed me slightly. There was a man at the desk and a couple waiting by the entrance, their luggage piled next to them. Normalcy. But as I walked outside, the cold air hit me and the unease returned. The streets were quieter now, the hum of the city reduced to the occasional rumble of a car or the faint laughter from a distant pub. I turned the corner and started walking quickly, unsure where to go but needing to move. That's when I heard them. Footsteps. They were faint at first, but steady, echoing softly behind me. My heart leaped into my throat. I glanced over my shoulder, but the street appeared empty. Still, the sound persisted, matching my pace. I quickened my steps, my breath coming faster. The footsteps grew louder. I broke into a run. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay still. My shoes slapped against the pavement as I turned down a side street, then another, the narrow lanes twisting into a maze. The city's glow seemed farther away with each step, the shadows growing darker. Finally, I spotted a man standing on the corner, scrolling through his phone. He looked young, his backpack suggesting he might be a tourist like me. Without thinking, I ran straight to him. "Help me," I gasped, grabbing his arm. The man looked startled, his wide eyes meeting mine. "What's going on?" he asked, his accent soft and Irish. "They're following me." I pointed behind me, my voice shaking. He looked past me, then back at my panicked face. "Okay," he said firmly. "Let's get somewhere safe." He flagged down a passing taxi. "Come on," he said, opening the door for me. We both climbed inside, and the driver turned to look at us. "Where to?" "The nearest police station," the man said without hesitation. The ride felt both fast and endless. I tried to catch my breath, but my chest was tight with fear. "What happened?" the man asked gently. I hesitated, unsure how to explain. "Someone put a note in my pocket," I said, pulling it out too. "Show him." It led me to a cafe, where a woman warned me to leave. "Now, I think someone's after me." The man frowned, but didn't question me further. "You did the right thing coming here," he said. When we arrived at the police station, the bright lights and uniformed officers were a welcome sight. We stepped inside, and the man who introduced himself as Liam stayed close to me as I approached the front desk. "What seems to be the problem?" the officer asked, his tone calm but serious. I handed him the note. "Someone put this in my pocket." I went to the address, and a woman there said I was being watched. Then, someone started following me. The officer's expression hardened. "Come with me," he said, leading us to a small room with a table and chairs. Another officer joined us, a notepad in hand. "Start from the beginning," he said. I took a deep breath and recounted everything. The alley, the man with the box, the note, the cafe, the woman's warning, and the footsteps that had chased me through the streets. The officers exchanged glances as I finished. "And you have no idea who put this note in your pocket?" one of them asked. I shook my head. "No, it must have been while I was walking earlier tonight." The officer nodded. "Wait here," he said, taking the note and leaving the room. Liam gave me an encouraging smile. "You're doing great," he said softly. I tried to smile back, but my nerves were still on edge. "What if they don't believe me?" "They will," he said firmly. "You've done nothing wrong." After what felt like an eternity, the officer returned. His expression was serious. "Miss, this note contains information about a planned crime," he said. "It seems you've stumbled into something much bigger than you realized." I stared at him, my heart sinking. "What kind of crime?" He hesitated before replying. "Smuggling. The man you saw in the alley and the people following you are likely part of a group we've been tracking for months. Thanks to this note, we now have solid evidence to act." The words hit me like a wave. I had been caught in the middle of something dangerous without even knowing it. "You did the right thing coming to us," the officer continued. "This information might have just stopped a major operation." The rest of the night was a blur. The police worked quickly, using the note and my description of the events to track down the suspects. Liam stayed with me, offering quiet support as I answered more questions by the time the sun began to rise. The officers informed us that 2 suspects had been detained, the man from the alley and another individual near the cafe. "Thanks to your actions, we were able to recover stolen items and prevent further crimes," the officer said. "You've helped us more than you know." I felt a mix of relief and exhaustion. Back at the hotel later that morning, I sat by the window, staring out at the bustling city below. Everything felt different now. The fear was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of pride. I had been terrified, unsure of myself and my English, but I had found the words I needed when it mattered most. "This is just the beginning," I whispered to myself, smiling. Did you enjoy Emma's story? Improve your English with fun, easy-to-follow adventures. Subscribe for more exciting stories. Like this video and share it with friends. Comment below. What would you have done in Emma's place? Let's learn English together. Start now.